Vado era che ci ha lasciato un attimo tutti con il piano sospeso quando si è capotato nella variante Ascari, e la Vinanzi chiaramente dell'Italia, dell'Italia che ormai da una paio di stagioni fa di questa casa un punto di riferimento soprattutto per gli sportivi italiani, che la Scuderia Italia è qui a pochi chilometri dall'Autodromo Nazionale di Monza. Prima mi ero dimenticato di citarla, è stata una dimenticanza grave, quindi chiedo scusa. Ma siamo oramai...
There are the first three rows of the grid. Mika Häkkinen and Johnny Herbert on row 4. And then Häkkinen's teammate Mark Blundell. Heinz-Harald Frentzen in the Sauber Ford has done extremely well here, and he was 7th fastest in the warm-up this morning. Looking forward to driving for Sauber next year. He re-signed for them here at Monza and will be using the new Ford V10 engine. Luca Badoer there had a very nasty crash yesterday at the Ascari bends, but he had no problem personally. The car was rather sick after it had finished rolling, but they've rebuilt it, as they have rebuilt the car of his teammate Pedro Lamy, and they're both starting in this race. 24 competitors, and the race is a 53 lap one. That's 191 miles.
And I think in general from qualifying we saw pretty typical positions from the drivers. The real ones who exceeded their normal position was David Coulthard. David Coulthard's been third on the grid no less than 7 times this year, and here is his second pole position. The other one to do very well in fact was Rubens Barrichello. Now Barrichello generally qualifies around about 9th, but he was up to 6th position, and that really was a superb performance of Barrichello. He was actually 5th in Germany and really has outshone his teammate Eddie Irvine, who's been in trouble really this weekend. That's Rubens Barrichello there in the Jordan, the only car with a 7-speed gearbox with the Peugeot V10 engine. Eddie Irvine though, now he's really gone downhill this weekend, down in 12th place on the grid, and of course Damon Hill has been one of the others to lose his normal position. Hill, having been on pole position many times this year, he's back in 4th place, but as he said, this is a track upon which one can overtake, and that's going to be very, very important for him. And we're going to see pit stop strategy too, of course, being important. And one of the interesting things here is that it's been found that the tyres that Goodyear have brought here are incredibly durable. In fact, there is virtually no wear at all on these tyres, so hard are they. Now the plus side of that is that they won't wear out, and therefore there is less requirement to do more pit stops. There is therefore less to be gained too by putting on fresh tyres. Another little plus side in fact is that we shall see very few of what we call the marbles around, and that's the little chunks of rubber offline. The harder the tyres are, of course, the less rubber comes off them, and that means it'll be easier for the drivers to overtake being offline, and that's all going to be to good effect.
12th on the grid, Eddie Irvine in the Jordan. The next one you're going to see is Olivier Panis in the Ligier Mugen, who is starting again behind his teammate Martin Brundle. Panis is 13th. Now Jean-Christophe Bouillon, the Frenchman, who is also the Williams test driver, and he says driving the Sauber after the Williams is not a pleasant experience because the Williams is such a superb motor car. That's Mika Salo, the Finnish driver in the Tyrrell Yamaha. He is 16th on the grid, and as you see from that, there are now less than 60 seconds to go to the start of the 53 lap 191 mile Italian Grand Prix of 1995, where we have David Coulthard there, nearest the bottom of your screen, in pole position. Next to him is Michael Schumacher. It's going to be the dash up to the Rettifilio. Berger in the powerful V12 Ferrari, in which this morning he was 3rd fastest in the warm-up. Damon Hill is right behind Schumacher, and behind Gerhard Berger on the right-hand side of the grid, as you look at it, is his teammate Jean Alesi, the winner in Canada, who, like Berger, would dearly love to win here. Rubens Barrichello, 6th on the grid, an excellent performance. And you're looking now down the start and finish straight to the famous Parabolica corner in the background as away they go on the parade lap.
Interesting to see that Michael Schumacher is on brand new tyres there as Mika Häkkinen lights up the rear tyres, getting some wheel spin. That's that smoke. But look at that smooth surface too. This is the new surface that we've got here at Monza, and that means that we see much less of the bottoming. Now that is the Rettifilia chicane. That is where Eddie Irvine went up to the back of Johnny Herbert in last year's race at the start, through there in 2nd gear, being careful to use just the right amount of curb. That's round about, probably about a foot of curb on that. And we can see on this diagram in front of us the intermediate 1 and intermediate 2. These are points upon which the timing is done. It's not just done on the start-finish line, and in qualifying we see the time it takes to do each of these 3 sectors. But the interesting point for us in the race is that that will allow us to check the gap between 2 cars, not just at the start-finish line, but also at those 2 intermediate points. Now behind us now is the Rogier chicane. This is another second gear, 60 miles an hour chicane, into the first Lesmo. Now the circuit's been modified this year, and then into the second Lesmo. These are both third gear corners. That's coming out of the third gear. That means around about 100 miles an hour, 110 miles an hour. Now this is a very fast circuit. It's very fast, it means high top speeds, and high top speeds means small wings, and you can just see ahead how very thin basically the rear wing on those cars are. The combination of little downforce and hard tyres means that the cars will slide around a great deal, and it looks like David Coulthard's gone off on the warm-up lap.
Well, somebody certainly has, and it's a Williams, and it is David Coulthard. Now, this is quite incredible. David Coulthard, for whatever reason, has blown his chances of winning the Italian Grand Prix before it even starts. And that means to say, Berry is struggling back onto the line, but even if his car is undamaged, he will have to start from the back of the grid, and that effectively makes Michael Schumacher the pole position holder, with Gerhard Berger moving up to second and Damon Hill up to third, and there will be nobody on the... Here's a replay coming up now. Let's look at it.
Now let's have a look there. He gets on the power, the back comes around, he goes into the gravel trap. I don't think he's actually touched anything. Now this is simply exactly what I was saying, the combination of low downforce, these very hard tyres. It's taken these drivers a long time throughout the weekend in terms of a number of laps to get temperature into those tyres, but that is a basic driving mistake from David Coulthard. Now whether or not he'll come back into the pits to have the car checked or change tyres, that really is what he needs to do, because he will not get any significant grip from being on those tyres with all of that gravel on. Now these cars will be accelerating from 0 to 185 miles an hour off the line, then have to brake right down to 50 miles an hour into that first chicane.
As they sweep away the dust, watch for the lights. It'll be some time before they come up yet, of course, but as you see on the left, Michael Schumacher is now in pole position effectively, with to the right in the red Ferrari Gerhard Berger, and behind Schumacher is Damon Hill, and into the pits has come David Coulthard as the last 2 cars, the 40s, come up to take their position on the 23 car grid. Schumacher cutting off Gerhard Berger, Alesi trying to sprint through, but Schumacher, Alesi and Berger go into the Renofilio together. Now, are they ever going to get through? They're all through so far. Somebody nearly off, but as we move round with the leaders, it looked to me as though everybody got round, except, of course, the unfortunate David Coulthard. Maybe it was the stress of the occasion that got to the Scotsman, but whatever, his chances of winning have been severely diminished, because he's coming out from the pit lane eventually to start right behind the rest of the field. And Schumacher leads. Ferrari, Johnny Herbert is up into 4th position ahead of Damon Hill, and it is Gerhard Berger who is second. It's Jean Alesi who is third, and this has been the opportunity of a lifetime for Michael Schumacher, who must be sitting there hardly believing his luck that David Coulthard, who has dominated the Monza meeting so far with fastest time on Friday and then a repeat to give him pole position for the start of the race, didn't even start it. And David Coulthard is the first retirement of the Italian Grand Prix. He is out of the race. And now the and that is on Montemini out in the Pacific. So that's 2 retirements, and there is it's Bouillon. And behind Bouillon is one of the Arrows cars. It looked like Max Papis to me. So that's 4 cars missing at the end of the first lap. And into the lead goes the Ferrari. Gerhard Berger has gone into the lead in the Ferrari ahead of Michael Schumacher, and they're going to have to stop the race. They're going to have to stop the race. The red flag is out. The Italian Grand Prix is being stopped. Now, this is a good thing for David Coulthard because they will have to reform the grid, and he should be able to get back on the grid in pole position. And there is Coulthard's car in the garage. And they're getting the spare car ready for David Coulthard. So terrible luck for Max Papis, for Bouillon, but great luck for David Coulthard. This is his chance. Here's a replay.
Now that's the Pacific there of Montermini, I'm sure, spinning, or it might even be a Tyrrell. No, that's Montermini. Papis ahead. Through goes Lamy in one of the Minardes, then Moreno, I believe. And so that is Montermini. Difficult to know quite what happened there, how it was caused, but that was at the Ascari chicane. Then that's Pedro Diniz. So Pedro Diniz in one of the 40 cars, he was involved. And there we are, there's Montermini getting really very agitated indeed. Not quite sure why, but maybe he thinks he can get his car back to the pits. But this is going to be a tremendous relief for David Coulthard. Now the spare Williams is set up for Damon Hill, and despite the fact they're roughly the same size, there is a lot to be done. You can see the track is virtually blocked. In fact, it is completely blocked there, and they're being channeled around, and this will mean that they're going to be picking up dirt and dust because they're right offline on that, and we may well see some tyre changes going on now. But what a huge relief for David Coulthard. He won't believe it. He will have been absolutely distraught to have gone off like that, and now his emotions are going to be in complete turmoil as he now needs to get back in that car. He will know the team will have been absolutely furious with him. He'll be furious with himself, but this is a second chance, and this will mean that at the restart, David Coulthard will once again start from his pole position place.
The amazing thing about Coulthard going off, of course, and this is a comment and not a criticism, is that he would have known how hard those Goodyear A compound tyres are. He's been using them through Friday and Saturday qualifying, and this morning he would know, of course, that as the man in pole position, his is the responsibility for leading the field round, and he can drive at any pace he likes. But it's all too easy to make comments like that when you're not sitting in the cockpit.
Now here we can see the replay, and it looked like Papis there, just spinning. I think that's Papis, Max Papis in the footwork car, but really it's not, I don't think it's desperately important into this point as to who's to blame for that. But once cars goes off with that congested first lap, there is such a great chance of the race being stopped. Now, because the race was stopped before 2 laps have been completed, and there's a little bit of a fire going on there momentarily, I believe, or maybe that, yes, there is indeed a bit of a fire, and I think that was out of the back of the footwork car. It is indeed, that's the car of Papis. Now, because the race was stopped before 2 laps have been completed, the race will be restarted, the grid will be reformed to the original grid, and the race will be then run to the full standard distance, so a full 53 laps. So anyone those drivers who've got spare cars to get back into, and that will be Papis, I'm sure, although again the car may have to be changed from Inouye, because I suspect that Inouye's contract gives him priority on the spare car. Now here's another look there. Now there is Papis, and it looks like Papis there. Is he going to touch? If he hasn't touched, he's got very close to Panis in the Ligier. There is Luco. No, I think that might be Martini or Luco Badeau. It's one of the Minardes. Behind spins a Tyrrell, and that looks like Katayama. And let's see if we get anything more to look at. No, we haven't. Although no, we're back to the grid.
Incredulous looks on the face of David Coulthard as he emerged from the back of the Williams garage. He snatched a quick word with Frank Williams and then proceeded to try and get all the concrete dust off his visor from his helmet. And now the mechanics are furiously working, changing the bits from his original car. They're moving the pedals, they're adjusting the seats and the seat belts, frantically working, getting this T-car transferred from Damon Hill's setups inside the cockpit for David Coulthard. So it looks like he's getting another chance.
There are all sorts of things that wouldn't immediately strike you that have to be changed on the car. For instance, they have an electronic fly-by-wire throttle, and the way David Coulthard uses it and the way Damon Hill uses it is very different indeed. And that was a problem in a previous race when David had to take over Damon's car, or the T-car as it was at the time, and he found a great deal of difficulty in adjusting to the way that Damon used the throttle pedal. but the Williams team are absolutely superb at crises. Here's a replay of the start.
Now let's look at Michael Schumacher right at the front, squeezing across to Gerhard Berger. Now Michael Schumacher, you can see he just gives him a little bit of room, but I'm sure that manoeuvre is going to be looked at by the stewards, because of course Schumacher was given a one-race suspended ban, suspended for 4 races, which basically means that if he committed another transgression within the next 4 races, and this is one of them, then he would be banned for 1 Grand Prix. Now Berger had the run on him, I would say. Berger was slightly closing on Schumacher, but Schumacher definitely moved across. Now they didn't touch, and Schumacher did give Berger room, and I think that's he'll probably get away with that one, but he's certainly pushing things very, very hard indeed. But of course it is so desperately important to get ahead, and there I think we might just have seen what happened to Diniz. There was certainly a 40 there that looked as if it was being chopped pretty hard by one of the Pacifics right at the back of the field coming into the Rettifilo.
Bit of a problem for Ferrari, of course, if they feel that Schumacher moving across on Gerhard Berger denied him his racing line. David Coulthard going out in the spare Williams, and Alesi, why is Alesi out of his car? Because he's waiting for the restart. And I was saying it's a bit of a problem for Ferrari, because they are hardly likely to protest the man who is allegedly costing them £16 million a year to join them in 1996. And Gerhard Berger, after all, had got in front of Michael Schumacher before the race was stopped, and that's very significant indeed. Berger is in absolutely superb form here. He seems to get younger as the years go by, and of course he's got an enormous amount of experience.
Now the rules state that these cars can all be A, worked upon, and B, refueled up until the 5-minute board, and I should imagine that the 5-minute board will come out just as soon as the track is cleared and the debris and the dust is swept off the exit from that Ascari chicane. That's terribly important. And you can see really we're going back to the sort of scenario at the start of the race, and it's going to be very, very difficult for David Coulthard now, because he's going to have to try and put completely out of his mind 2 things. The biggest being that huge mistake he made in just putting on too much power when his tyres were too cold. And it really is almost like driving on ice with these tyres. Until you get about 70 degrees, 80 degrees centigrade into these tyres, they have less grip than an ordinary road car tyre. And when you've got 700 horsepower being put down to the back wheels, it's desperately easy to lose control of the car. So he's got to put that to the back of his mind. And then he's got to put to the back of his mind the fact that he hasn't got that race car that he's evolved and honed over the last 2 days to get it into a superb form. He's now got Damon Hill's car, and the suspension settings that David Coulthard has are not too far removed, and not too far. That looks like David Coulthard's tyres there, I think, that he's coming over there. They're not too far removed from that of Damon Hill, but it won't give him quite that measure of confidence, because he never will have driven this car in anger. He never would have driven it at all, quite frankly, this whole weekend. And on the one next formation lap that leads into... Now let's have another look. There is Michael Schumacher again. Well, that's very close indeed, and that's real right on the edge stuff from Michael Schumacher as John Alesi looks for the outside. But look how close these Ferraris were to getting into trouble. This is what surprised me. We can see that Gerhard Berger just gets inside, and then let's look at the back too. No, we're not going to be able to follow the back. There's Eddie Irvine to the right. Now he's got through successfully this time. Jean Alesi tucks in behind Gerhard Berger going into the first part of that Rettifilo. Very good start there from Johnny Herbert. You know, Herbert was 8th on the grid, and that's quite superb, moving up 4 places off the line, or I suppose to extent 3 on the basis that David Coulthard did not take that start.
Well, if anybody can overcome the pressure problem that he's under now, I think David Coulthard will be able to. It's not just that he is now, and I emphasise the word now, fully fit, because he was suffering from tonsillitis for the first half of the season, and he's managed to shake that off, and he's race fit again. It's not just that, but he's psychologically enormously fit too. He has psychological training, he has controlled aggression training, with the emphasis on the word controlled, and he is a very, very tough young man, both physically and mentally. So Schumacher goes through. There is Gerhard Berger behind him, and Alesi. Off goes Johnny Herbert, but regains the track immediately in 4th position, with Damon Hill behind in 5th place. And there you see the shambles in the back with the 40 and the arrows and the rest of them.
Now, we've seen that replay a few times. What would be interesting is to look back at the front of the field, because at the end of that first lap, Gerhard Berger towed up behind. We're not looking at it now. You can see the fire at the back of Max Pappis's footwork, the Ares car, and Bouillon. Now, he's the second driver of the Sauber team, also involved in that. But brief time to talk about strategy. Now, I think we're going to expect to see most cars make just one stop in this 53-lap race. The reason being mainly is that the tyres really don't lose any significant performance as the laps goes on. So there is a performance gain to be wrought from having the car lighter, but not one from the tyres. And normally it's the combination of the two that justifies making an extra pit stop. But I think there are going to be a few exceptions to that. I think that we are going to see the Tyrrell team stop. They stopped twice last year. They stopped round about lap 11 or 12, and they went very well because of it. And I think we may well see them adopt a similar strategy, whilst the Pacific team don't in fact have the fuel tank capacity to make one stop anyway. They need to have a tank capacity of at least 90-100 litres. Another look now. This is the start of the first race, and look at there. Johnny Herbert sweeps out there behind Rubens Barrichello there, and that was the start of a storming run for Johnny Herbert. Up to the first chicane there, moving right up to fourth place. He's got Damon Hill on his left. He moves across in front of Damon Hill, and so it's a Benetton sandwich for the Ferrari driver. Locks his left front wheel. That might have caused him a problem, but of course he may well be on a new set of tyres now. But back to the strategy. We think it's going to be one stop for all teams, apart from the Tyrrells, apart from the Pacifics. But what I now can see the back of the Pacific car of Montermini. And what I think is interesting is that we may well see a two-stop strategy from Ferrari, and certainly one of the cars with the objective of a Ferrari leading the Italian Grand Prix. Now, the pace of Berger has certainly not been quite up to that of Schumacher or Coulthard, and I just wonder, looking at that storming first lap that Berger ran, whether or not we can expect to see Berger, the Ferrari driver, who will make two stops, and that may well mean coming in round about lap 12, lap 13, rather than round about lap 25, when we would expect the one-stop strategies to begin.
Well, for sure, it looks certain that Andrea Montemini will not be starting again. It looked to me as though the rear wing had been torn off the back of the Pacific. The extremely excitable young man was agitatedly talking to the marshal, as you saw earlier on, and we've seen him in the garage now, so it would appear. And here's another replay, so let's have a look as away goes the Ferrari with Michael Schumacher in that effective pole position, moves across on Gerhard Berger. There is no doubt about that. Now, he would say, of course, that he was taking up his racing line for the Rettifilio. There he is going into it, whilst Berger on the right and Alesi on the left nearly come together but managed to avoid doing so. Johnny Herbert already up into fourth place, and there is John Alesi. So, if you've just joined us and wonder why the Italian Grand Prix is not in full flight, the answer is that, quite incredibly, David Coulthard, who is shown there in pole position on the starting grid, when leading the field round, went off at the Ascari chicane. That's about roughly two-thirds of the way round the lap. Lost the Williams altogether. Everybody streamed past him. He struggled back onto the track, but then when the start happened, Schumacher had moved up into effectively pole position, with Berger up into third and Hill up into fourth. When the lights went to green, Schumacher went into the Rettifilio chicane first, followed by the two Ferraris. Johnny Herbert surged up into fourth place ahead of Damon Hill, but then a whole lot of people came together at the Ascari chicane after David Coulthard. The track was blocked. Max Papis had gone off in his footwork car, and the race was stopped and is about to be restarted.
Alongside David Coulthard's car, and all seems to be okay. David Coulthard understandably doesn't want to talk. He feels a little bit upset with himself naturally after that incident. He was telling team press officer Annie Bradshaw the biggest problem has been the seat belts. The seat has gone in okay. The new brake balance for Coulthard is okay, but they don't have time to change the belts over, and David Coulthard is not comfortable with Damon Hill's belts, but he said apparently to his mechanics he'll be okay.
Now, just let's remind ourselves that in starting in the T car, David Coulthard is at a severe disadvantage. He hasn't driven this car during the qualifying. He got his own car set up absolutely perfectly for him, and we'll just have to hope that everything is to his satisfaction.
Yes, I don't think it should be too far adrift in terms of settings from the car that he's been used to. He won't have quite the confidence in it, that's the main thing, and he's going to have to put that to the back of his mind. He's going to assume it's just another Williams, that it's effectively identical to his own, and I don't think it should prove too much of a handicap. Interesting about the belts there, and we could see that this year they've got wider seat belts in Formula 1 with a bit more padding. That was one of a whole range of safety changes introduced. That's Flavio Briatore, who heads the Benetton team. And incidentally, one has to be squeezed into these cars, and the belts have to be that tight that the driver himself cannot tighten them up. He has to have a mechanic there who will literally wrench on the belts to squeeze the driver into the back of the seats, because unless you do that, the belts won't be tight enough to withstand the 3 to 4G of the hard braking and the cornering that goes on.
David Coulthard may be at a disadvantage, but frankly, that was his fault. He went off and nobody pushed him off. So really he is an extremely lucky young man to have the opportunity to regain the situation of being in pole position and to get away hopefully in first place when the race starts and not before it starts. That is Jean-Christophe Bouillon, the Frenchman in the Sauber, and he's starting from the pit lane. And he is in the spare car. Michael Schumacher, there's a man who is very hard indeed to rattle, and he's in a strong position. He's started, he knows exactly what the course conditions are like. He's getting away from second position on the grid against a David Coulthard who is bound to have been adversely affected a bit. That's Martin Brundle, 11th on the grid in the Ligier, which was hit at enormous velocity by Montermini's Pacific in the warm-up, just as it was closing, the half-hour final practice session, and they've had to completely rebuild that car with a different engine and a different gearbox, but it is actually, apart from that, the same car that he was driven into this morning, Gerhard Berger. Third position on the grid in the Ferrari.
And interestingly, reflecting on Michael Schumacher, Damon Hill at the end of the Belgian Grand Prix, as we know, objected to certain parts of Michael Schumacher's vigorous defence of his position when Hill was on wets and Schumacher was on slicks, and the stewards looked at the original footage that indeed we saw and were not convinced there was anything wrong with that, but then they had some overhead footage taken from the helicopter, and on that basis they then judged that Schumacher was indeed out of order, that he was in fact weaving. He weaved from side to side more than the twice that's allowed. He weaved from side to side 4 times, and for that reason he was given the 1 race ban, suspended for 4 races. And of course, again, just to be quite clear, that means that he will not be banned from a race unless he makes another mistake like that. But after that, the Benetton team appealed against that, but then they withdrew the appeal, I think being fearful that history proves that appeals in motor racing tend to lead to an increase of the penalty rather than it being decreased. But despite that, Schumacher has still maintained that he did nothing wrong and that he was merely taking a racing line, and that he did not at any time drive unreasonably.
I talked to him about it yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I said, look, you're under a suspended 1 race ban. That means if you put a foot out of line or a wheel out of line, you're in danger of being penalised, and much more badly. How is it affecting you? How's it going to affect your race tactics? How are you going to drive? And he gave a sort of wry grin and said, I don't know, to be honest. Let's just wait and see what happens. Well, we've seen what happened, and now we're all ready, and the race is due to start at 25 minutes past the hour, which is in rather less than 60 seconds time. And when I say due to start, I mean, as before, there is going to be a parade lap, and David Coulthard will be making jolly sure this time, in a different car from the one that he was in before, that he does not make the same mistake that he made at the Ascari Benz, go off and prejudice very badly indeed his chances of doing well. He's enormously lucky that he's sitting there again in pole position as the race restarts 25 minutes after it got away originally. for another parade lap, and then 53 laps of this Monza circuit. So Coulthard on the right, Schumacher on the left. Behind Coulthard is Berger. Behind Schumacher is his rival Damon Hill. There are 15 points between them in the World Championship. David Coulthard wants to win, and it's crucial for Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill that they win.
So off we go again. This is the final formation lap, to make sure that all the cars' engines and gearboxes and everything is running properly before they come around at the end of this lap to take the grid proper. So the Rettifilio, this is the corner that tends to claim the most cars in terms of spins and incidents. This is where we saw the first lap accident last year that saw the race being stopped. And then going around here, interesting to consider that David Coulthard is certainly very, very fortunate to be back in the race, but he's going to be at a disadvantage because the other cars, like Michael Schumacher here around him, they know just how much grip there is on that critical first lap. And it's not just the formation lap when the grip is limited, it's also probably the first 2 or 3 laps, certainly the first 2 laps. And I suspect that Coulthard will lose out on that first lap. I suspect that he's going to get hounded by Schumacher and by Berger and anybody else who manages to get close to him, because he's bound to be considerably more prudent. The second Lesmo corner here, and again this is the part of the track that's been modified. You can see the extensive runoff areas to your right. These were about 1/3 of the distance last year. Coming down towards the Ascari chicane and this next chicane, and you can see the cars weaving. Now weaving is always done, but here, for the reasons that we've gone on about, and you can see again Schumacher's got a brand new tyre on that right front, very interesting there. Now this was the corner, the Ascari chicane, where we saw the incident that actually caused the first race start to be, or the first race to be stopped. And incidentally, this is the 3rd race now out of 4 in which there has been, and Schumacher coming very close to going by David Coulthard, but he will know perfectly well that of course he can't go by. He was penalised for that at the British Grand Prix last year, but this is the most intensive weaving that we've seen anywhere this year, again because of these very hard tyres, because of the low levels of downforce, and everybody will want to make sure that both the tyres and the brakes are in best possible form. They won't be fully up to race temperature to take this start, because once again, let's not forget the sheer drama of the start here, going from 0 to 185 miles an hour in 5th or 6th gear before braking hard again on cold-ish tyres, coldish brakes, plenty of opportunity for mistakes. And we'll see here the cars peel across from the left, take their position on the right, and incidentally cars are not supposed to cross that white line on their right.
Gerhard Berger really giving it some stick as he weaved and twisted and turned to build up heat. I say again, you've heard it several times, but it really is desperately important to register that they are hard compound tyres. They are not up to race temperature. We've seen already what happened once. Bouillon starting from the pit lane in the Sauber Ford. The rest are on the grid. Coulthard in front. To the left of him, Schumacher. Behind Coulthard is Berger. Behind Schumacher is Damon Hill. Behind Berger is Jean Alesi in the second Scarlet Ferrari. Behind Damon Hill is Rubens Barrichello, and Lavaggi at the back in the Pacific comes up to his position. The race is almost go. Schumacher, who comes up to the Rettifilio, and Berger has got ahead of Schumacher. So Coulthard leads. Berger's got ahead of Schumacher in the Benetton, who've got Damon Hill right behind him. And heavens, they've all got through the Rettifilio, and Coulthard has already built a gap. He's settled down absolutely magnificently. David Coulthard in the Williams Renault leads. Gerhard Berger in the Ferrari. Michael Schumacher in the Benetton. Damon Hill is 4th. Herbert is in 5th position. Jean Alesi in the second Ferrari has been passed by Herbert, and Berger is going for the lead. He knows now that if he pressures David Coulthard, this will be the Scotsman's weakest time during the race before he fully settles down, but he seems to have done that already. Coming out of the Lesmo bends up to the Ascari chicane. It's a bit of a climb here, and it's turning left, right, left. Coulthard, Berger, Schumacher, Hill, Herbert. out of the chicane. Now it's up to the parabolica. The long 180-degree right-hander. We're riding with Gerhard Berger in second position, and that is Coulthard's Williams Renault in front of us as they go into the parabolica. Slowing from 190 to 100 miles an hour, Jean Alesi in the Ferrari, and it's going to be across the line at the end of the first lap. Coulthard, Berger, Schumacher, Berger having a look. Coulthard will have nothing of it. He's well and truly in the groove now. Schumacher is third. Hill is right behind him. There's a gap between Damon Hill and that's Jean Alesi, who is in fifth position, followed by Johnny Herbert. The first four are easing away. This is the Roja. Up to the first Lesmo and the second Lesmo, and the drivers are all saying, without exception, that although Monza has been altered in terms of the Rettifilio, the Rogia, the Lesmo Benz and the Ascari Benz, the Italians have done a superb job in maintaining the character of the track but making it much safer with big runoff areas, and that is one of the Tyrrell's Ukyo Katayama being passed as Coulthard comes through. Berger. And this is the Ascari Benz again. Schumacher making no impression on Gerhard Berger, who really made a magnificent passing manoeuvre. He locked everything up, tar smoke pouring off his Goodyears, and got past, and there is the spin that I was talking about, and it's one of the Ligiers involved. It looked like Martin Brundle to me, who's got through safely. And over the line, this is the end of the second lap out of 53, and you can see how close it is, and that's the order. Well, Coulthard now has got a lead of just about 0.6 of a second over Gerhard Berger, but the important thing, he's got a clear track in front of him. He knows what the conditions are and the circumstances are, and in spite of the fact that he's in the spare Williams, he seems to have mastered it and have adjusted to whatever differences remained between Damon Hill's spare car and his own race car.
And that spinner, incidentally, was Salo. That was Mika Salo in one of the Tyrrells who went off, but he has recovered and he has continued, and he's back on the road again, although, of course, dead last.
So now we can watch and enjoy this. A Williams Renault leads, a Ferrari is second, a Benetton is in third place. Damon Hill needs to get up to Michael Schumacher and get past him to improve his World Championship chances, because when all is said and done, whilst Michael Schumacher would dearly love to win this race, which he did not take part in last year on account of the fact that he was serving the first of a two-race ban, really all he wants to do is finish ahead of Damon Hill and increase the points gap between himself and the Englishman in the World Championship. There are 6 races left, including this one, which Coulthard still leads. That is Gerhard Berger. They're coming into the Rettifilio. Schumacher is holding a watching brief, as is Damon Hill. There is Jean Alesi, and then there's a big gap of 2.6 seconds. But Rubens Barrichello has now got past Johnny Herbert. Rubens Barrichello is up into 6th place in the Jordan Peugeot. Down to 7th goes Johnny Herbert.
Well, I must say I'm very impressed indeed with David Coulthard here. He did a great start, and that couldn't have been easy with all the pressures against him. And then he did indeed manage to keep well ahead of Berger for the first corner. Berger caught him briefly, looked like having a go, but within half a lap, Coulthard was back in his stride. Schumacher getting very wide there, and let's let Damon Hill get right up on the back of him. And I would think by now, they're now on their 4th lap. David Coulthard's going to be completely in the groove now. He's going to be driving that Williams as though it was his own. But you know, it's quite remarkable how a driver can get into a car that he's never driven before. He knows it should be set up the same, but he can't be absolutely sure until he's out there pushing to the limit round the corners. And if it's not right, of course, he risks going off there. Now riding with Michael Schumacher coming down, following Gerhard Berger, who's got, of course, David Coulthard right in front of him. But this looks like we've got a pretty close battle battle for these 5 cars, the 2 Williams, the 2 Ferraris and Schumacher's Benetton. And what would be great is if they could all be on the same fuel strategy. But I still have a little bit of a hunch at this stage that Gerhard Berger could be the man on 2 stops, with the others being on just 1.
And I've got a bit of a hunch that Damon Hill is starting to give Michael Schumacher a hard time, because whilst Coulthard and Berger are easing away from Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, the lead now that they have is something like 1.5 seconds over 3rd place. Damon Hill is right up close. He's less than half a second now behind. In fact, there he is. There's Schumacher. There is Hill. There is Alesi. Here is Rubens Barrichello, who is in 6th position. And Damon Hill, who had a lot of problems setting up the Williams, got it right to his satisfaction today. He was only 5th fastest in the warm-up, but in spite of that, he said the car is better this morning than it's been on Saturday or on Friday. I'm very happy about its condition for the race. That is Schumacher, that is Hill, there is Alesi, and Damon Hill is definitely closing on Michael Schumacher. But as I've said many times before, and will doubtless say again, catching is one thing, getting past is another. But now we're on lap 5, and here they come. Coulthard, Berger, Schumacher, Hill, Alesi, then the fairly long gap to that's Rubens Barrichello. Behind him is Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren, who's in 7th place and has therefore passed Johnny Herbert, who does not seem to be able to get to grips with the Benetton. Martin Brundle, Mark Blundell, and they are 10th and 11th as Coulthard leads into and out of the Rettifilio. And between the leader, David Coulthard, and Jean Alesi, who is in 5th position, there were only 3.8 seconds after the completion of 5 laps. That's how close it is at Monza. Schumacher, there he is of course now a very experienced driver. This is his 64th Grand Prix. He, as I said, knows that if he stays in front of Damon Hill, he will be perfectly happy. He will be content to hold a watching brief. After all, you can see how close Berger is to him, and he can see David Coulthard as well in the lead as Alesi comes through in 5th position, and Rubens Barrichello is now nearly 4 seconds in 6th position behind the Ferrari of Jean Alesi. Down to the Parabolica.
Pleased to note that in fact Eddie Irvine has been one of the great stormers of the opening laps. Irvine qualified back in 12th place, but he's already moved up 3 places. He's in 9th now, ahead of Martin Brundle in 10th and Mark Blundell in 11th and Frenson in 12th, and all those 3 cars were ahead of him on the grid. So good driving from Eddie Irvine.
Well, here is Martin Brundle with Mark Blundell having a look, with Heinz-Harald Frenson right behind him in 12th position. Round the Parabolica, and Olivier Panis in the 2nd. Ligier Mugen is in 13th place. In fact, on lap 7 out of 53, David Coulthard has increased his lead marginally by 0.2 of a second over Gerhard Berger to 0.7 of a second, with Schumacher now speeding up. He's just the fastest man on the track. 1 minute 27.6 is the lap that he's just done, which is 4 seconds outside, slower than Damon Hill's all-time lap record with a bigger engine and more downforce. But I just have a feeling that Schumacher is not unhappy with where he is now. He looks to me as though he's not pressing terribly hard. That's a Pacific off, and that's Giovanni Lavaggi. So that's both the Pacifics out, with Montermini failing to start and Lavaggi out of the race as Coulthard comes down to the Parabolica towards us again, lap 7.
And in this situation, it's harder for David Coulthard than for the drivers following him. When you get an incident like that, when Lavaggi has spun off in the Pacific, we could see the marshals sweeping off the dust, but the yellow flags will almost certainly be out. Now Coulthard will be the first on that scene, and therefore he will tend to be more careful than the drivers behind, who can see how David Coulthard gets on. And there's Lavaggi going away. The tractor is moving away straight away. Very, very quick action there by the Monza marshals. So coming down through the chicane. Now let's see if indeed, well, it looks like David Coulthard really has lost absolutely nothing there. So good judgment from there. The action, the drama of Lavaggi and the dust must have been well and truly out of the way.
And this is the scrap to watch too. There's two of them, and they're both involved with McLaren cars, because Mika Häkkinen is now right up with Rubens Barrichello, who is sixth. Touch of dust there from Michael Schumacher as he went out of the bend. Gerhard Berger ahead of Michael Schumacher, there he is, and Schumacher is pushing very hard indeed now, because he's seeing David Coulthard stretch his lead. It's up to 1.2 seconds on lap 8 out of 53. Schumacher in third position, pushing Berger, has still got Damon Hill behind him in fourth place, who has still got Jean Alesi in fifth position. But you'll see coming round together now, hopefully, Barrichello and Mika Häkkinen. If you keep your eyes on the corner, there they are, you just saw them come round. It's very close indeed for 6th and 7th, and it's very close indeed for 11th and 12th between Häkkinen's teammate Blundell and Heinz-Harald Frentzen. So, looking down, this is the entry to the Rettifilo, and you're looking at the race leader, David Coulthard. And still between first and fifth there is only 5.5 seconds. It's mighty close, and round about, we think, lap 24, and this is lap 9, the stops will start, if you follow me. And so there is Martin Brundle. He's moving up well in his moving down. I apologise. Martin Brundle has been passed in his Ligier Mugen, and Coulthard, followed by Berger, Schumacher and Hill. It remains the same.
Yes, indeed, we didn't see it, but Mark Blundell obviously found a way by Martin Brundle there. Blundell driving the McLaren Mercedes, Brundle in the Ligier Mugen Honda. And no great surprise there, because the straight-line speeds of the Mercedes-engined McLarens really have been pretty impressive throughout the weekend, particularly in race form. And that's why I'd expect to see Häkkinen and Blundell do relatively better in the race than they have done so far in qualifying. But at the moment, Häkkinen is just half a second behind Barrichello, and the Jordan and the McLaren are always embroiled in what we call the Division 2 battle. Division 1 being the Ferraris, the Benetons, the Williams, and then the Jordans and McLarens in Division 2. So far, Barrichello just ahead by half a second of Häkkinen.
Nearly up to 1/5 distance in the Italian Grand Prix, with things very close indeed at the front. Coulthard is now leading Berger by 2.4 seconds. So David has really got a grip on the race. Nearly 2.5 seconds ahead of Berger, who has got Michael Schumacher right behind him. There is Damon Hill in the Williams, still in fourth position. Alesi fifth. Barrichello is sixth. Häkkinen is seventh in the McLaren. Johnny Herbert is in 8th position. 9th is Eddie Irvine. 10th and 11th are Mark Blundell and Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who have both got past Martin Brundle, probably experiencing problems with that rebuilt car of his. And everybody is pressuring everyone in front of him, with the exception of David Coulthard, of course, who is in front of the whole lot on lap 10 out of 53. Long way to go, but if he keeps this up, it's going to be good news for the Scotsman.
Yes, David Coulthard pulling out about 0.3 of a second a lap, which is quite considerable really, and it was the kind of form that we did expect from him, from his qualifying form and indeed from his form in the practice sessions generally. And Coulthard really has been absolutely superb this weekend, and what's been interesting in fact is that since the Hungarian Grand Prix, after which Damon Hill's drive was confirmed at Williams, and which meant that David Coulthard lost his drive, we've seen an increase in the performance of David Coulthard and a bit of an off time perhaps from Damon Hill. He wasn't in peak form by his own admission at Spa, at the Belgian Grand Prix 2 weekends ago, and he hasn't really been, and he admits it, on pace with David Coulthard. So one can't help but feel that part of the reason for Coulthard's increased performance. Now let's have a look. That's looks like one of that is the incident we saw before with Lavaggi spinning off. Now that actually happened about 3 laps ago, and just a replay of that. But look at all the shingle, look at all that gravel that's put out on the circuit. That's what the marshals had to clear up so quickly. But back to David Coulthard, he really does seem to have raised his game in if not desperation, certainly an intense desire to prove what he possibly can. Whilst I know, although he didn't admit it in that interview, I know that he has actually found a bit more speed with evolution of technique. And what he found was that he was actually trying a bit too hard in some ways. He was going into the slower corners, braking too late, and that meant that his car wasn't settled down enough turning in, and he had to go. And that looks a problem there for a Ligier. And whether it's an engine or not, I can't quite be sure, or a bit of bodywork. Certainly a lot of smoke out of the back of a Ligier there, and it looks like it's Panis. It's Panis. It's a left rear tyre blow. Brundle, I beg your pardon.
Martin Brundle with a blown left rear tyre. You can see now, maybe he was having a slow puncture when Blundell and Frentzen got past him, but for whatever, Martin Brundle is going to have to limp back to the pits, change that left rear. They'll change the other 3 tyres and wheels at the same time, of course. And now we are on lap 12. We're about halfway to the expected first tyre and refuelling stops, when things could change, because modern Grand Prix racing is not just between cars and drivers, it's between teams. It doesn't matter how good these days the driver is, it doesn't matter how good the car is, the support work that they get when they come in from the mechanics and the refuelers has got to be equally good if they are not to lose their place. Martin Brundle has just exited the Lesmo bends. He's coming up to the Ascari bends.
And what's happening there is that flailing rubber is tearing off his bodywork. There's nothing really Martin Brundle can do apart from drive back. But I suspect he'll find that as and when he gets back to the pits, that his car is going to be that destroyed from flailing tyres, that left rear, that he will have to retire. A great shame for Martin Brundle. He will see the bits falling off it. He'll feel tremendous vibration. He won't be able to even hardly see where he's going for all that vibration, even though he's only doing about 50 or 60 miles an hour. Quite a compromise for a driver in the situation, and there the Ligier team getting ready with a set of tyres. But again, I suspect that once they inspect the rear of that car, they'll realise it's to no avail. But for a driver, you're desperate to get back to the pits with your car. Now look at the right front. See how that right front tyre is virtually in the air? You can see the remnants of it as Martin limps that car back to the pits. But of course, the faster you go on a flat tyre, the greater the chance of it disintegrating like that. But the slower you go, the more time, of course, you'll lose getting back to the pits.
No change at the front, but a very considerable change for Martin Brundle, and things looking good for David Coulthard on lap 13, 40 laps to go. He's now 3 seconds ahead of Gerhard Berger, who is 1.7 seconds ahead of Michael Schumacher, who is 0.8 of a second ahead of Damon Hill. There is Schumacher, there is Damon Hill. Now we're waiting for Jean Alesi to come round. That is him, followed by Rubens Barrichello. To show you how much of a grip on the race David Coulthard has got, on his 11th lap he went round even faster. The first man to do a lap in under 1 minute 27 seconds here at Monza today, and that is Mika Salo, the Finnish driver in the Tyrrell. And whatever is the problem seems to be taking a long time. 17 seconds seems to me far more than refuelling and tyres. Berger second, Schumacher third. Is he got something in reserve? Hill fourth, Alesi in fifth position. Now coming towards us is Rubens Barrichello in the Jordan. He's seventh, followed by Mika Häkkinen, who is eighth. Right behind him in the Benetton is Johnny Herbert, and Martin Brundle comes into the pits in the Ligier. Let's watch him have that tyre change.
And let's hope that he can just come out of the pits and there is not too much bodywork damage done to that Ligier car. No, we've just heard that in fact that's not the case. There is too much damage, as we suspected. Martin Brundle is sadly out of the Italian Grand Prix. And David Coulthard spins off there. David Coulthard's done it again.
Now, can he keep going? That's the important thing. These gravel tracks are supposed to stop the cars altogether, but David Coulthard is amazingly finding traction. My goodness, he's going to be in a state, having done it not once but twice, before the Italian Grand Prix and during the Italian Grand Prix. Now the question is, at what point is he? Here's a replay as Coulthard loses the back of the car. It spins round, does a full 360. Now the great thing is that he kept the engine running, and the even greater thing is that he managed to keep traction, because look how deep the gravel is there.
Let's have another look. He locks the rear brakes, you could just see it. The car spins around 360 degrees, and his heart would have been in his mouth at this stage. Apart from the fact that he knows he's made a big mistake, he'd also be desperate to eke it along, keep it going, get it past that gravel, and it could so easily have bogged down and stopped.
And now Gerhard Berger, to the delight of the Tifosi, leads the Italian Italian Grand Prix, and you can see now that Michael Schumacher behind him and Damon Hill behind him will regard this as the ultimate in motivation, because if they can catch and get past the Austrian Gerhard Berger in the Ferrari, whoever does it will be leading, and the World Championship is effectively between those two men at the present moment. Gerhard Berger is down in 6th position in the championship, but he won a magnificent race for Ferrari here in 1988 after Ayrton Senna had been punted off the course by Schlesser, and Gerhard Berger would love to do it again, of course. This is his last Italian Grand Prix for Ferrari. Now mark this, the gap between Berger and Schumacher was 1.7 seconds at the end of the previous lap. The team is all ready to get David Coulthard in, who stops. He has to be pulled back. Gone too far, he's overshot, and he's lost a lot of time. Oh, this is not going to be a race that David Coulthard will want to be remembering.
No, it really has all gone horribly wrong for David Coulthard with that first race formation lap spin, checking the wick, getting the stones there, out of the discs there, on go a second set of tyres. This was an unscheduled stop. He's coming a lot earlier for that first stop. He's losing a lot of time. He's out of the race. For David Coulthard, it is all over, and I'm afraid it was due, I'm pretty sure, to a mistake, a driving error. He was pulling away. He had 2.8 seconds over Gerhard Berger. He had no reason to push desperately hard. He made a mistake, I believe, under braking, unless we hear anything different, and that has put him out of the race.
And a grim-faced Patrick Head walked out of the garage as David Coulthard walked in. Patrick Head being the technical director of Williams and the disciplinarian there, and he won't be at all happy, sadly, with David Coulthard's performance. A race which could have helped the Scotsman so much with his future, either with Ferrari or McLaren, has not done him any good. First of all, going off on that warm-up lap, then having built a good lead, to throw it away for whatever reason by spinning out of the race. He was lucky to be able to get back on the track, but as you see, probably because of stones all over the place, they've had to withdraw him. And now on lap 16, with the stops coming up, Gerhard Berger is 1.8 seconds ahead of Michael Schumacher, with Damon Hill in 3rd place and just 2.3 seconds covering them. There they are, Berger, Schumacher, Hill. Now, just listen when Gerhard Berger goes past the start and finish point to the crowd. So, Berger manages to get past Pedro Diniz in the 40. Now, that will help him a great deal, because Schumacher and Hill have got to do the same thing, and Pedro Diniz is an inexperienced driver. This is his first season, but he moves over and lets Schumacher through, lets Hill through. The gap has dropped down to 1.3 seconds, but now they're right in amongst traffic because it's the Tyrrell in front of them, and Berger is bearing down on Ukyo Katayama in the Tyrrell Yamaha to lap him. And Katayama, of course, is a lot faster than Diniz was. And Berger nearly loses it sideways as he comes out of the Lesmo, and Katayama needs to move over and let him through. Is he going to do so? Katayama went well here, and he wants to do well again this year, but Berger passes him into the Ascari bends, and he's making the most of the traffic.
And this is turning out to be an absolutely superb Grand Prix. I can't remember a race when we last had at lap 16 3 cars, all A covered by 2 seconds, but B 3 different cars, a Ferrari, a Benetton and a Williams. Now let's just hope that in fact all 3 of these cars are on the same refuelling strategy.
But can Damon Hill right up behind Schumacher at the Parabolica? He saw his opportunity there, but Schumacher has managed to keep him past.
Yes, now the important thing is that if we've got these 3 cars all on the same refuelling strategy, and my guess is just one stop, and that's going to be round about between lap 24 and then there goes Michael Schumacher, and oh, very, very close indeed for Damon Hill. Katayama didn't see him, or if he did, he closed the door firmly, and Damon should now get Katayama coming into this next Roggia chicane. He will have lost about a second there, but the important thing is that No mistake was made, certainly not by Damon Hill. Now let's look for Damon Hill to come up the inside of Katayama. He does that cleanly. But of course the problem for Katayama is that he, as with Salo, is on a two-stop strategy with that Tyrrell team. He's on fresh tyres, he's desperate to make up time, and he does not want to lose any more than he possibly can. Now, talking about strategy, we shall know in the next 2 or 3 laps if any of these first 3 drivers are going to be making 2 stops, because if they are, it'll need to be in those next 2 or 3 laps. Now, if they're not, what I think is going to be interesting is to see, and Alesi there going past Katayama, that's lapping Katayama, of course. Now, what's going to be interesting is when exactly they stop, because it's my guess that we will probably see Michael Schumacher in that Benetton stay out a bit longer, rather than the Williams and the Ferraris stopping round about lap 24, lap 25 or lap 26. I wouldn't be surprised to see Schumacher stay out till maybe lap 28, even lap 30, to give him 3 or 4 laps of clear track. At the moment he's got Gerhard Berger in front of him. It doesn't look as if Berger's holding him up, but you never know, in which to really pile on the pressure to get out of synchrony with the fuel stop strategy adopted by Williams and Benetton, Williams and Ferrari. And the reason that Benetton can do that is because they do have a larger fuel tank capacity. The Williams fuel tank will only hold just over 110 litres, and that's half a tank of fuel. Benetton, though, can go a bit longer.
And you were riding with Damon Hill, and you saw the Benetton of Michael Schumacher in front. It's still tremendously close. Only 5 seconds cover the first 4 on lap 19 out of 53. There's the leader. Now, I apologise, that's Sean Alesi coming through, having passed and lapped Uka Katayama. There was the leader. Here is Schumacher. There is Damon Hill. And now Gerhard Berger is closing up on the other Tyrrell, that of Mika Salo, who is in the 16th place. It's Mika's first race at Monza, but he's a very experienced driver in Formula 3000. He loves the circuit. He was telling me that he likes Monza very much indeed. He's learned it very quickly. It's a comparatively easy circuit to learn. And Gerhard Berger goes round the Parabolica on lap 19 to come through and finish the lap. Now, he was 2.2 seconds ahead, and he's now got past Mika Salo at this vital point, the Rettifilo, the double chicane. But it looks to me as though Salo's going to be out of the chicane before Schumacher closes up to him. That's Sean Alesi. The gap now is just about the same, but Berger is very much in control of this race at the moment. But then I remember saying not so long ago exactly the same thing about David Coulthard, who had nearly a 3-second lead. This is the 20th lap. That is Jean Alesi. Behind him is Rubens Barrichello, 11 seconds behind him. Barrichello is 5th. Hakkinen is in 6th position. In 7th place it's Herbert. In 8th position it is Eddie Irvine. 9th is Mark Blundell. 10th is Heinz-Harald Frentzen. And in 11th and 12th places are Parnis and Badar. So that's Schumacher coming up behind Mika Salo, and now you can see how close 2nd, 3rd and 4th are as we are on the Ferrari now of Jean Alesi going down to the Parabolica. There's Berger. Now that Salo is going to be lapped. Schumacher's got Hill right behind him. That is Jean Alesi in 4th position, and there is only 1.5 seconds between Alesi in the Ferrari and Hill in the Williams, and they're being held up by Mika Salo. They're not going to get past him at the Rettifilo, I do believe, although look how close Damon Hill is. They both have a go and they both get past.
This really is absolutely fantastic. The 2 championship leaders there, Michael Schumacher leading the championship and just leading Damon Hill. We are now just over 1/3 distance, and I believe that anybody who was going to make 2 stops would have made them by now. We saw Tyrrell do it, but Hill is just now 0.2 of a second behind Schumacher, and this is going to be a crucial race for Damon Hill's championship challenge. He really has got to try and work out a way of getting by Michael Schumacher. Now, historically, the Benetton team have been cleverer when it comes to stopping. Now, we can assume, I think, that both Benetton and Williams are just going to stop once, so it's going to come down to pit stop technique. Can Damon Hill get into the pits faster? Can the Williams team refuel and change those tyres quicker than the Benetton team can do it on Michael Schumacher's car? Now, something which I think may well help Michael Schumacher is that if I'm right in believing that he's going to come in probably 3 or 4 laps later than Damon Hill, that's going to mean that he's going to need to be in the pits for a little bit less time, because he'll need to take on board less fuel. Certainly whoever comes in first is going to have to spend a little bit more time. It may be minuscule, but a little bit more time in the pits, because they'll need to take on enough fuel to get to the very end of the race.
That's the Ligier out. That's the second Ligier. Martin Brundle has already retired, and now Olivier Panis spins out at the Rettifilio. His car, you can see, is off the racing line, and you see now Michael Schumacher, and here's a replay of what happened. Panis spins round over one curb, over the other, and out of the race. Berger leads. Schumacher and Hill second and third, nothing in it. This is the Roja.
Well, that's all too easy to do, referring to Panis' spin there at the end of the straight. The problem is that this circuit being so very, very fast means you need to run the cars with very little downforce. Now look how thin those rear wings are. You need to have very small wings to go for maximum straight line speed. Now the payoff from that is that when you have small wings, you have less grip, and the slower you go, the less grip you have. Berger really pulling out the stops now, setting a new fastest lap. The slower you go, you have less grip, and that means that on the chicanes they really are on tiptoes, and it caught Panis out, particularly on the brakes.
Riding with Damon Hill, Schumacher in front in second place, but right behind Damon Hill in his mirrors is Jean Alesi, who has closed the gap from 1.5 seconds to just a whisker over 1 second. The Ferrari is catching the Williams, and it's therefore catching the Benetton, and Gerhard Berger is now a comfortable 3.5 seconds in front of this battle that we are with. This is 190 miles an hour. Down to the Rettifilio. 55 miles an hour. Schumacher in front. And look at Jean Alesi. Here's the man to look at, because now the gap is 0.7 of a second, 7/10 of a second. And Gerhard Berger has lapped Bouillon. He's coming up to Taki Inoue, who is in 13th position. But all eyes now are not so much on Gerhard Berger, although of course the Italian crowd is holding its breath. This is the battle they're watching, the 3-car battle, which is getting in amongst traffic. Schumacher second, Hill third, Alesi in 4th position, and Berger is past Inoue. Now that's Bouillon that Schumacher has got to get past. Jean-Christophe Bouillon in the Sauber Ford, and he is in 14th position, and we're with Damon Hill. Now this is the run down to the Parabolica. This is 190 miles an hour. This is the Parabolica, and that is the battle for second place.
And this is lap 23 that they're on now. Now I expect the first, or in fact the only fuel stop that all these cars will make, certainly the leading 3, to come beginning lap 24. It could be lap 24 onwards when it's all going to happen.
Bouillon is in front of Schumacher and is about to be lapped. He moves over, Schumacher gets through, Damon Hill gets through, and Alesi gets through. Second, third and fourth pass and lap 14th place Jean-Christophe Bouillon, and the implacable rivals Schumacher and Hill are now up with Taki Inoue and past his arrows. That shows you the speed differential between a top car and one of the lesser ones. And Hill hits Schumacher, they both go off! They both go off! This is a repetition of Silverstone! Amazing! Taki Inoue, I don't know whether he got in the way, but Hill attacked, saw his opportunity. Schumacher running up to the Williams. Now is he going to have words with Damon Hill? And the crowd is going wild with delight, because they know now that Alesi is second. Damon Hill in the car, and Schumacher shaking his head in disbelief. Now, it's so easy to arrive at a split-second point of view, but here's a replay now. Look, there is Inoue. Schumacher turns in, and Hill, who was passing Inoue, is right behind the Benetton, clips its left rear wheel, and there's going to be a big discussion about this as a disgusted, angry Michael Schumacher walks back with Damon Hill, and the crowd are delighted.
Well, fundamentally, that was a mistake from Damon Hill. I think he underestimated where Michael Schumacher was going to brake going into. Let's have another look. Here we are now with Damon Hill. Now, on the right-hand side, we have got Dewey and Schumacher is in front. Schumacher brakes, lifts off the throttle. Hill simply brakes too late. He cannot stop. This is what Senna did. Senna ran up the back of, I think it was Martin Brundle, and that was a couple of years ago. Exactly the same corner. Simply brake too late. A fundamental mistake there, I'm afraid, from Damon Hill. Certainly with mitigating circumstances of the distraction of having Taki Inouye right in front there, but ultimately that really is no defence, I'm afraid, and Michael Schumacher will be absolutely livid. He was taken off as far as he was concerned, and indeed as far as many were concerned, by a misjudged overtaking manoeuvre from Damon Hill at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and then Michael Schumacher had to face what he considered the very rich criticism from Damon Hill at the Belgian Grand Prix when Hill criticised Schumacher for dangerous driving, and then this. Well, this really is what a turn of events here, and of course that means that Schumacher does still stay in the championship lead, and Hill will have no chance to close the gap.
But look at the right-hand side of Gerhard Berger's Ferrari when you can. It looked to me as though there was a lump missing out of it. I may have misread the situation, but whatever. Lacey is up into second place. There is Hill's car being removed from the track, and into the pits comes race leader Gerhard Berger. So now Jean Alesi will go up into the lead. Jean Alesi then leads the Italian Grand Prix as Gerhard Berger on lap 25 makes what is obviously going to be his sole tyre and refuelling stop. And you can see by the time it took 15 seconds that a lot of fuel has gone in, and that means obviously that he's got the remaining full race distance to go. Rubens Barrichello has gone up into second place. Up into third has gone Hakkinen. Up into fourth has gone Johnny Herbert in the sole now remaining Benetton. Hill and Schumacher and Coulthard all out of the race, and the points gap between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill therefore remains at 15 points between them, but now with 5 races for Damon Hill to do something about it, whereas when this one began it was 6.
Well, that was a good refuelling stop by the Ferrari team with Gerhard Berger. 15 seconds was exactly what you would expect it to put on, about 105 litres of fuel. And the total fuel used will be therefore, of course, about 220 litres. But we're now going to see only, I believe, and that's in fact Mark Blundell there up behind Gerhard Berger, but Berger having come out after his pit stop, and we should see Berger pull away. Mark Blundell, and that looked. No, well, Blundell does make use of the fact that he's on warmer tyres. Now the problem here is Jean Alesi comes in for his pit stop. Let's see how long this takes. 15 seconds there for Gerhard Berger.
The Ferrari mechanics are excellent at this, and Alesi was 13 seconds ahead of Rubens Barrichello when he came in. Now he's on the 27th lap and they're peeling off. There's going to be a lot of tyre and for refuelling stops now. The situation is going to be very confusing for a while, and that is Eddie Irvine on a replay moving ahead of Gerhard Berger after the Austrian's tyre stop. Irvine moving up into 5th position. That's Mark Blundell, who was 7th in the McLaren Mercedes, into the pits. As you can see, another long stop. Out he goes.
Now the really interesting stop to watch is going to be the one between these two drivers, and that's Rubens Barrichello. Barrichello is currently leading. Hakkinen is in second place, but of course both need to stop yet. And Hakkinen is just 1 second behind Barrichello, and 1 second is the type of difference that can be made up by better pit technique. And McLaren will know that if they can get Hakkinen out of the pits ahead of Barrichello, then that's a position gained.
Here's a resume. David Coulthard is out of the Italian Grand Prix, having led it. Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher have taken each other out again, as they did at Silverstone, and are no longer racing at Monza. Rubens Barrichello, and there he is, leads on lap 27, but not for much longer, I think, because into the pit lane he comes, and over the line goes Mika Hakkinen to go into the lead, and that, if my memory serves me correctly, is the first time that a McLaren Mercedes has been in the lead this year, and for a very long time. Well, this year is the first year they've had the Mercedes engine, and Barrichello sits in the pits. Hakkinen leads, Herbert is second, Irvine is third, but none of those three have yet made their tyre stops as Olivier Panis walks in.
Interesting to see there on that Jordan pit stop that the mechanic had a blue blanket there on top of the side pod just below the refuelling nozzle, and I'm sure that's a legacy from the refuelling fire that of course occurred to Eddie Irvine's car. Now we need to look for Mika Hakkinen, because Hakkinen will of course be he's now ahead, he's now leading, but he has yet to make his pit stop. So Hakkinen out in front leading the Italian Grand Prix, but that will be a temporary affair. We are going to see Gerhard Berger back out in front and Jean Alesi. In fact, Alesi is ahead, I beg your pardon. Alesi is leading Berger. Berger is 1 second behind Alesi, so that is really the true picture.
Yes, effectively, Jean Alesi is leading the Italian Grand Prix from his teammate Gerhard Berger, as out goes Luca Badoer in the Minardi, and Mika Hakkinen is the actual race leader, with Johnny Herbert tight up behind him. This is a replay of Badoer going off at the second Lesmo, loses it altogether over the curb. That's exactly what he did yesterday, albeit in a different place. They rebuilt his car overnight, and they're going to have to rebuild it again as race leader Mika Hakkinen comes into the pits. 28 laps completed in this 53-lap race. Johnny Herbert leads the Italian Grand Prix. Mika Hakkinen sprints out, and when this race settles down round about lap 30, I'm expecting Alesi and Berger, who are now second and third, to be leading, because they have completed their stops. In fact, of the first 8 drivers, only one has not stopped, and that's the man you're looking at in the red topped helmet, Johnny Herbert, the British Grand Prix winner who leads in Italy. So watch the British race leader Johnny Herbert, but the Scottish ex-race leader David Coulthard is with Tony Jardine.
David Coulthard, you got led off, got a red flag off the first instant, got back in, leading beautifully, then tell us what happened.
Well, we know now that where the front bearing failed, and it's something that hasn't happened for many years according to Patrick, and basically the wheel bearing was collapsing and then the wheel was moving around, and all that was holding the wheel on really is the brake disc, and then eventually the brake disc got very hot, and just when I was braking into the chicane it locked and put me into a spin, and obviously I managed to keep the car going, and I hoped that maybe it was just a wheel that was coming loose, but unfortunately that was it, race over.
You very nearly got across the sand trap, but how did you feel after the first mistake and then getting another chance?
Well, obviously very happy. I'm disappointed that I made the mistake, and I think I lost it on some oil there that was left from the Clio race, and obviously I was the first one through, so it just caught me out. Disappointed with that. Sorry that I did stop the first start, but glad that I was able to get back in, and glad to show that I was able to run at the front very comfortably and pull away.
Did you get any indication at all that it was about to go, or did it go suddenly?
No, when I came out of this parabolica, I got on the radio and said that I've got a problem with the front wheel, and I told them to expect me to come in that lap. And unfortunately it caught me out going into the second chicane, and I did come in that lap, but obviously terminally. Hard luck, David. You put on a brilliant show. Well done. Thank you.
Well, I'm very pleased and indeed relieved for David Coulthard from a personal point of view that incident was not, as we've now heard, due to anything from his point of view. It was not a driving error, clearly there a car problem with the front bearing, and indeed great shame there for David Coulthard, and just as well that we have our man in the pits to find out what really happened. Now, whilst that's been going on, Johnny Herbert has done what we suspected Michael Schumacher would do, and that's stay out. Herbert has not made his pit stop, and there he does. Herbert now coming in, but also I can tell you that Mika Hakkinen did indeed get ahead of Rubens Barrichello on their round of stops. So Hakkinen now in 4th place, which will in fact be 3rd with Herbert in the pits.
Now you're watching Johnny Herbert, I'm watching the track just in front of Herbert to see the Ferrari of Jean Alesi go past into the lead, and it's going to be Johnny Herbert exiting the pit lane, and it's going to be a very close thing indeed. The Ferraris, both of them, there they are. Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger are 1st and 2nd at Monza on lap 31 as ex-leader Johnny Herbert rejoins the track. It's going to be very close indeed. Mika Hakkinen is right with them. Rubens Barrichello is there. Now, in 1988, just after the death of the great Enzo Ferrari, Gerhard Berger gave the Maranello team, the historic, the great Maranello team, who have won more pole positions and more races than any other Formula One constructor. A magnificent win to lift the spirits of Italy. And his teammate was in second position, and now we're getting a replay of this. And as I say, the tifosi here, who are fanatically pro-Ferrari, nothing else matters in the world except that Ferrari could do well, are holding their breath. We're on lap 31. It's a 53-lap race. Both Alesi and Berger have made what we believe will be their only tyre and refuelling stop. You can see how close to each other they are. They're ahead of Johnny Herbert, who has made what we believe to be his sole stop. He's in third position. The sole remaining Benetton, I remind you, of course, that Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher have again collided and retired. The David Coulthard, who you've just heard from, is out of the race. And in fifth and sixth positions are Rubens Barrichello and Heinz-Harald Frentzen.
A thought here, but I do wonder with that front hub failure of David Coulthard's if that might have had something to do with Coulthard, indeed all the drivers driving over the curbs here. We saw it just then, we saw it with Alesi, we saw it with Berger. Let's have another look. Through goes Alesi. Just, in fact, he's being very, very neat indeed, keeping off the curbs at those points. Just clipped it there, but you can see that sawtooth curb that is pretty vicious, and it might just be that running over the curb, something that David Coulthard was doing, but we said that was perfectly acceptable in qualifying, might just have been contributory towards that failure. But certainly I wouldn't want anyone to think that Coulthard could be blamed too heavily if that indeed was the case.
And let me second that remark of Jonathan's most sincerely. I'm just as pleased as he is that it was not indeed a mistake of David Coulthard's, which people may have thought, but was in fact a mechanical problem with the car. It's another indication of the dreadful luck that young David Coulthard has had. It's his sixth retirement from a Grand Prix this year. In comes the Tyrrell of Mika Salo, who is in ninth position. But now on lap 32 in this 53-lap race, Alesi and Berger are absolutely together. We don't know whether there's team orders, and if so, what they will be. But everybody's going to be very circumspect about doing anything in a situation where Ferraris are first and second at Monza. Johnny Herbert is 9 seconds behind Alesi in third position, and 5 seconds ahead of Hakkinen, who is in fourth place. Barrichello, and there is Alfa Ferrari, and that is Gerhard Berger. What an incredible race this is. It's certainly not going to be a Ferrari first and second, because Berger is out of the race. So we've had race leader David Coulthard retire. We've had now race leader, ex-race leader Gerhard Berger retire, and that's his last Italian Grand Prix for Monza. Here is a replay, and he did it all by himself at the back there. What happened, whether a suspension unit broke, whether one of the elements in the suspension broke, or whether it was a puncture, I don't know, but Berger is most definitely out.
Well, it looked like a front track rod failure, in fact, because we could see that left front wheel flapping, turning left and right by itself. The tyre looked to be intact. And that's a pretty unusual sort of failure. Again, we didn't see him touch anybody. That could be one reason for that. But the other one, it could perhaps be a consequence of this grueling circuit with the damage that can be done building up by going over these curbs.
Well, Alesi can really take it comparatively easily now, and would be well advised to do so. This is lap 34, and it means to say that with the retirement of Gerhard Berger, Johnny Herbert has moved up into second position in the Benetton, some 8.5 seconds behind Alesi, who can therefore be very careful indeed. He'll get all the information he needs from the pit board and the radio. Mika Hakkinen is in third position, 14 seconds behind Alesi. Hakkinen, of course, in the McLaren Mercedes. Here's a replay, and you see the sparks and now the rubber as the left front wheel locks up and turns. Yes, it's flapping about. It's obviously a left suspension breakage.
Yes, we could see the sparks come off. That would have been from the suspension breakage, and that would have happened at about 175 miles an hour. Absolutely incredible, with the car still cornering. Now that would have been one huge moment for Gerhard Berger there, and that all the tyre smoke we saw came from Berger instantly jamming on the brakes, desperate to slow that Ferrari down, and he did so very well indeed. And a great credit to Gerhard Berger that after a failure like that, at that sort of speed, that no further damage was done.
That's Sean Lacey, 8.5 seconds between him and Johnny Herbert, who is as anxious to do well in this race for his reputation next year, because he's going to be driving a different motor car, we know that. In second position, Mika Häkkinen is third, and Gerhard Berger walks in, having retired from his last Italian Grand Prix for Ferrari. So, race order, Alesi leads, lap 35, that's Eddie Irvine, and he's ahead of Mark Blundell, and they're 6th and 7th. Alesi leads, Herbert second, Häkkinen is third, Barrichello is 4th, Frentzen is 5th, and Irvine is 6th. So both the Jordan Peugeots of Rubens Barrichello, that's Sean Alesi's Japanese girlfriend, and obviously pretty happy about the situation that exists at the present moment, but obviously keeping our fingers crossed that it continues this way. Is Jean Alesi on track now for his second Grand Prix win of 1995. So off shoots somebody at the second Lesmo and rejoins the track equally quickly. I'm sorry I didn't spot who it was, because I'm watching Jean Alesi coming down the long straight to the Parabolica at 190 miles an hour before he turns in, and that is the stricken Ferrari, and you can see the bent push rod, the suspension push rod on the left front of the car. Johnny Herbert there second.
Yes, I think that was a bent wishbone on that. That's one of the front suspension links. Now that's the kind of failure that one could well have got as a consequence of the cars bouncing over the curbs. And what's interesting is, if that failure of David Coulthard's is to do with curbing, that the cars seem to be more vulnerable this year for some reason to that than has happened before. They may be unconnected, but certainly I would suspect that there is a consequence of going over the curbs for these failures.
Well, as you watch Mark Blundell go round behind Eddie Irvine, he's in 7th position, and here is Jean Alesi leading. The battle in this race at the present moment is between Mika Häkkinen and Rubens Barrichello for 3rd position, which Häkkinen has got at the moment, and Barrichello is only just about a second behind him. But Alesi here in the Ferrari can now concentrate on bringing the car home. He's out of the second Lesmo. Now this is the run down to the Ascari chicane, the left, right, left, and he closes up on, it looks like Mikosalo to me in the Tyrrell, as I'm just looking to see Gerhard Berger. He's in amongst the crowd, and there is no doubt at all that Gerhard Berger is the most popular driver here with Jean Alesi. There are banners to both of them all over the circuit. And there is Johnny Herbert. Now that's the gap you've seen between Alesi, the leader, and Herbert second. As you look down for Häkkinen, look for the red and white McLaren, that's it. Third, behind him the green Jordan is Rubens Barrichello. Ignore those two, because coming towards us is Heinz-Harald Frentzen. He's the second of these two cars. Heinz-Harald Frentzen, the German in the Sauber, is again in the points. He's in 5th position. That's Eddie Irvine in the orange helmet, who is 6th. And Gerhard Berger, listen! A roar from the crowd saying, well done, Gerhard, you so nearly had it, but have been taken out through something which is not your fault at all. Jean Alesi is on lap 37 now, and he's up behind Ukko Katayama, who is already 5 laps behind, having been into the pits for a long time. And he was a bit of a mobile roadblock earlier on, but this time he lets Jean Alesi through, and you should just see Johnny Herbert come under the bridge. No, you don't, as Alesi turns into the chicane. This is by far the most important race of the year, of course, for Ferrari, and therefore Alesi, who leaves them to join Benetton next year.
And what we see in terms of the figures, 7.2 was the gap at that point on this lap. That was at the second intermediate, and the 8.1, I believe it was, that was the gap last lap. So that indicates that Herbert on this lap has closed up just a few tenths. It may well not be of significance. We know that cars are being lapped, and that's likely to have a bigger influence. But I'm sure Alesi is going to be far from confident that he's going to win this race. After all, last year he was on pole position. He led for the first third until his first pit stop, when he had a gear selection problem that caused him to retire. And in fact, even at the last Grand Prix in Belgium, he retired with a suspension failure. Now that was on the rear at that time, and one does wonder again if there's some kind of connection. It's probably unlikely, but I'm sure that both Ferrari and Alesi are going to be very well aware of that.
Now this is Sarlo and Bouillon fighting for 9th position, and coming up fast behind them are Barrichello and Frentzen, as through goes Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and Bouillon goes past the Tyrrell, and there is the McLaren and the Jordan of Rubens Barrichello fighting for that 3rd position as Jean Alesi comes through towards the end of another lap, which will be the end of his 38th lap in this 53-lap race.
And indeed, the battle for 5th place there. Frentzen currently in 5th, just behind him 1.6 seconds Eddie Irvine. Mark Blundell has closed right up. He's right on the back of Eddie Irvine, and that's where the best action's taking place. And it's my guess that Blundell's going to find his way past Irvine and Frentzen. Indeed he could, and this could well, indeed he should, I should say, because the McLaren with its Mercedes power is certainly quicker in a straight line than either of those cars. And this could well be a very good race indeed for McLaren.
It could well be a very good race for Johnny Herbert too, because he's actually lapping faster now, or was on the previous lap, than Jean Alesi, the race leader, and had closed the gap to just over 7 seconds. But that is Häkkinen. And there in the background is Barrichello. That's the gap between 3rd and 4th, with Alesi and Herbert leading. And behind them, Frentzen, who's now in 5th position, Irvine in 6th place. We're riding with the McLaren now up to the Rettifilio. Mark Blundell, and he's got in front of him Eddie Irvine's Jordan Peugeot. Now they're out of the Rettifilio and up towards the Rogia. Gerhard Berger. Jean Alesi, lap 39, race leader, gap over 7 seconds. Look for Johnny Herbert. That's not him. But that is. Now you can see. Now, 7.3 seconds was the gap. Here is Johnny Herbert in 2nd place. There. And he's certainly mastering the Benetton in this race. He's had so many handling problems with it in the past, trying to adapt to what is essentially Michael Schumacher's style. Over the line goes Johnny Herbert, and he is some 6.5 seconds ahead of Mika Häkkinen. The race order on lap 40 is Alesi leading Herbert by 7 seconds, who is 7.5 seconds ahead of Häkkinen, who is 5.3 seconds ahead of Rubens Barrichello, 4th. Heinz-Harald Frentzen is 17 seconds behind the Jordan in 5th position. Eddie Irvine is the 2nd Jordan in the top 6, 2 seconds behind Frentzen. Battle developing there. Herbert. Closing up on Katayama. Both the Tyrrells are still in the running. Mika Salo is in 9th position, and the leaders have lapped everybody up to Pedro Diniz in the 40. Well, he's already been lapped twice. Only the top 7 are on the same lap 40.
And Johnny Herbert there is gradually pulling in Jean Alesi. He's been taking off about 0.2 of a second, 0.3 of a second over the past few laps, and this looks like it's going to be very close indeed, with Mika Häkkinen also being about the same distance. He's maintaining about 6 or 7 seconds behind Herbert. But for some reason, Barrichello's dropped back away from Häkkinen. He was within a couple of seconds. He's now 5.3 seconds, so it appears that Barrichello may have had some incident, maybe ran wide, maybe a half spin somewhere to lose that time. Whilst Mark Blundell, he's now dropped back a little bit from Eddie Irvine, but it's now a straight race to the flag for all of these cars. They've all made their one stop. We've only got the Tyrrells, and in fact they've completed their second stop too, so every car who's racing out there is now racing for the flag with no more pit stops to go.
Round the grand curve goes Johnny Herbert's Benetton. John Lacey has responded to the challenge. He's just gone round in 1:27.1 compared with Herbert's 1:27.6. The gap is 7.6 seconds. And the Jordan mechanics are getting ready to receive somebody in.
And I think that is Rubens Barrichello. I know he dropped back. In fact, he's now dropped back another 5 seconds. Not sure what the problem is, but he's still running. He's running as we would expect from that, changing the gap about 4 or 5 seconds off his pace. Now that would tend to be too much for, and that is Eddie Irvine. Eddie Irvine's out. Now that means Mark Blundell moves up to 6th. And not a good time for Jordan now, because Barrichello is clearly in trouble too. Maybe some kind of engine problem, because I suspect if it was just tyres, there's no way he'd lose that much time.
Well, another bad luck race for Jordan. They've had 6 retirements for Rubens Barrichello already this season. They've had 6 retirements from 11 races for Eddie Irvine so far this season, before the one that you've just seen. So that makes 7 out of 11 races. But meantime, Johnny Herbert forces on now lap 42. This is where the real interest lies at the present moment, with Jean Alesi still 7.5 seconds in front of the Benetton. And Johnny Herbert is not there, is Alesi. Johnny Herbert is not only fighting for points for himself to enhance his already considerable reputation faced with a team change next year, but points for the Benetton team in the Constructors' Championship, because Michael Schumacher is out of the race. Benetton are 10 points ahead of Williams, both of whose drivers have retired in the Constructors' Championship, and if Johnny Herbert can give them another 6 points by finishing second, or even better from their point of view, 10 by winning, that would help them considerably in the Constructors' Championship. Herbert, lap 42, second only to Jean Alesi, ahead of Häkkinen third. Frentzen is up to 4th, Blundell is up to 5th, and Max Papis is coming into the reckoning now in the Arrows, and that was something we didn't expect.
Now here's a real challenge for Johnny Herbert. That's the Jordan team. They're waiting for Rubens Barrichello, although again I don't believe the problem is just tyres. But Johnny Herbert's really got a challenge now. He's got just 12 laps to catch up with that man, Jean Alesi. He is 7.5 seconds behind. That means he's got to be lapping roughly half a second faster, and currently he's not doing that. But we know the car has the potential. In fact, we know that Johnny's probably got the potential too. And if he's going to prove that Silverstone win was not just a fluke, but that is the kind of performance that he can put in, now is Johnny's chance to do it.
But he's going to have to beat that man. You see Alesi? You can see visually the gap. That's Johnny Herbert. 7.5 seconds, and it's been that for the last 3 laps. Alesi is driving a very cool, careful and calculated race based on information that he's getting from his people in the pits by radio, and he knows if he can maintain that cushion with now only 10 laps, including the one that he's on, he's home for his 2nd Grand Prix victory in his career, the 2nd of the year, having won in Canada. Johnny Herbert still 2nd, Häkkinen is still 3rd, so we've got a Ferrari in the lead. There it is, a Benetton in 2nd place. There it is, the gap between Herbert and Häkkinen, who I was waiting to see come out of the Ascari bends and didn't, is 9 seconds. Barrichello, we're still waiting to see what happens to him, as the Tyrrell and Max Papis, that's Papis and Salo, and Max Papis is now in an incredible 7th position. Now the Arrows team have yet to score a point in 1995, and if there's just one more car dropping out, then Max Papis will be in the top 6. And scoring a point. And I tell a lie because I forgot that Gianni Morbidelli had actually scored a point for the Arrows team, but another one would be extremely welcome. So Salo fighting Papis, Tyrrell against Arrows, and Alesi is on lap 44. It's getting closer and closer to the end of the Italian Grand Prix. It's getting more and more nail-biting as far as the Tifosi and the Ferrari team are concerned. And as I talk to you, Heinz-Harald Frentzen has passed Barrichello, who is obviously in trouble, and Frentzen is now therefore up into 4th place. That's the highest he's finished this year. He had a 4th place in Belgium, and it'll be a very welcome confirmation for the Sauber team of what a fine talent they've signed for 1996. Alesi coming out of the Parabolica. This is the end of his 44th lap. Into the Retrophilia. Jean Todt. That's the man who's been responsible for the rebuilding of the Ferrari team after it had been in the doldrums for so long, and a magnificent job he has made of it too. If Alesi wins this race, Jean Todt will be a hero, but not as much as Alesi. And that's Rubens Barrichello on the right-hand side of your screen, touring off with the back of his car on fire to retire and join his teammate. Another bitter pill, though it's just an overrun. The marshal gives it a squirt of fire extinguisher. Both Jordans are out.
And I suspect that the problem is engine problem on those problems with the Peugeot engine. The Marshall's having another puff with the fire extinguishers, because interestingly Peugeot do have a system on the engine that as and when any parameter of the engine's performance goes out of pre-prescribed limits, such as oil pressure or temperature, when that happens the computer will shut the engine down to avoid a spectacular blow-up. So I suspect that both Irvine and Barrichello have succumbed to that. A great shame for the Jordan team, and we now have Hakkinen there 12 seconds behind Johnny Herbert, Frentzen 17 seconds behind Hakkinen, and Blundell 6 seconds behind Frentzen. Now Blundell really will have the bit between his teeth now. Frentzen is possibly within reach, but again he's going to have to pick up about half a second if he's going to have a chance of doing that. That's the refueling nozzle there from the Ferrari team, and this is interesting actually. Well, it looks like Alesi may well be in for another slug of fuel, and that could completely change the situation if indeed that's the case.
Now, drivers tend to feel things at this stage of the race, and commentators tend to see things. I thought I saw a puff of smoke from the back of Alesi's car, which might have meant that he got a problem. I'm not saying he has got one, I'm just saying I thought I saw something. But it's strange that the mechanics are refueling him at this stage of the race. He's been in for what we thought was going to be his only tyre and fuel stop, so keep an eye very carefully on Jean Alesi on lap 46 out of 53.
Now one thing we do know is that looking again at that Ferrari, but we know that the Ferrari engine, that V12, has high fuel consumption. We also, and it's flames out of the back. There is indeed a problem with the Ferrari there of Jean Alesi.
Yeah, Alesi is going to be retiring, and Johnny Herbert is going to be coming up to take the lead in this astounding race. I thought Alesi was going slower. He looked to me as though he was, and there is Herbert in the background. What an incredible race. Coulthard retires in the lead. Berger retires having led. Schumacher and Hill retire. 4 of the top men. Now it looks as though fate is cruelly going to deny Jean Alesi victory in Italy for his last race. For Ferrari is coming to the pits, and Johnny Herbert will be taking the lead of the Italian Grand Prix, and Johnny Herbert goes through and is leading, and he's now on his 47th lap in this 53-lap race as Alesi struggles with whatever the problem is in the pits, and now he's fighting for second position.
And I wonder if in fact the problem might have been a brake. The brakes have been getting very hot at this race, particularly on a one-stop strategy. They've been looking at that right rear wheel, and if that brake disc had caught alight, it's a retirement. My guess is that it's a retirement due to a brake problem there. It looks like the smoke coming from that wheel, and with the high speeds of these cars in a straight line, they're as fast as they were last year, and indeed with running a one-stop strategy, which means the car will be heavier, there is greater load on the brakes, and it looks like The brakes on that Ferrari have caught fire. That's what we saw, and I'm afraid the damage is too much for Alesi to continue. The second Grand Prix in a row at Italy, at Monza, that Jean Alesi has led in front of the Ferrari home crowd and has had to retire from. He must be absolutely distraught. Jean Todt there, the technical director, consoling Alesi, but I should think he is virtually inconsolable. Poor Jean Alesi.
Oh, you can see from his body language how he feels. Nothing worse could possibly have happened to him. And what a fantastic race. 5 of the top men retire, and now there is the race leader in Italy at Monza. He's completed his 47th lap. We're riding with him now. He is Johnny Herbert in the Benetton, who won the British Grand Prix, who has had to take second place to Michael Schumacher and defer to him on every point in the Benetton team. But he's now just got the 48th, 49, 50, 1, 2 and 3 laps to go between himself and the checkered flag for a second potential Grand Prix victory this year. I say second because there's a long way to go, and here is a replay of Jean Alesi with flames licking at the back of the car. Hakkinen is now 17 seconds, looking good for a second place for McLaren behind Johnny Herbert. Frentzen is in his highest ever position. He's potentially going to be on the podium for Sauber for the first time, third position. Mark Blundell is fourth. That means 2 McLaren Mercedes in the top 4. This could be the comeback of McLaren. Fifth is Mika Salo for Tyrrell, who haven't scored a point, and Papis is an incredible 6th for Arrows.
There we can see the flames inside that right rear wheel, flames from the carbon fibre brake that's now worn down beyond limits, I'm absolutely sure. And we can see the wheel move too. Look at that wheel, because it's the hub bearing that's also been destroyed because of the heat from that fire. In fact, it might just be the hub bearing itself. That's another possibility. It may not be the brakes at all, but either way, certainly the problem is at the back end of that Ferrari. And Jean Alesi, of course, absolutely distraught.
A totally distraught Jean Alesi, and we're riding with Johnny Herbert, who is now on lap 49. Count the laps. 49, 50, 51, 52, 53. Race end. Is it going to end with Johnny Herbert winning the Italian Grand Prix totally against expectations, including, I'm sure, to be fair, his own? Hakkinen is fighting, but Herbert is lapping consistently, nearly half a second faster than Mika Hakkinen. But Heinz-Harald Frentzen is now in third position, lapping faster than Hakkinen, although he's 13 seconds behind him. He'll have to lap a lot faster than he's doing now to stand a chance of second place, but third would be very acceptable. Mark Blundell is still fourth, and he's 6 seconds behind Frentzen and lapping at about the same time. Mika Salo looks as though he could be getting Tyrrell's first point in 1995, and Max Papis in Italy is going to be overjoyed if he gets a World Championship point for 6th place where he is now. And you're watching race leader Herbert.
And I'm delighted to see Frentzen there up in third place in the Sauber. He's driven superbly all year, quite frankly, and Frentzen, I think, has been really one of the overlooked drivers in terms of the driver changes for the leading teams. I think he could have been as fast as Schumacher and a major asset to any of the front-running teams. But he's going to be with Sauber once again next year. Sauber are going to have their performance improved, I'm quite sure, with the Ford engine going to 10 cylinders. It's going to be a V10. And of course, this circuit at Monza is the designated test circuit for Sauber, for Ferrari, for Minardi, and also for Forti there. So all of those 4 teams should have an advantage, probably worth a few tenths of a second, perhaps 3 or 4 tenths of a second on this circuit.
Flavio Briatore, head man of Benetton, watches Johnny Herbert leading on race 50. Johnny Herbert, the man who was the British kart champion, who won the Formula Ford Festival at Brands Hatch in 1985, who in 1986, driving for Eddie Jordan's team, became the British Formula 3 champion, who crashed dreadfully in 1988 at Brands Hatch in the Formula 3000 race, having already won in Spain that season, shattered both his legs, worked brilliantly and manfully on recovering in enormous pain, recovered to go to Japan and subsequently win the Le Mans 24-hour race for Mazda. Now he's won the British Grand Prix. Is he going to win in Italy? Johnny Herbert crosses the line to complete his 50th lap. He's just got 3 laps to go. I remind you that in this really a quite amazing race, that David Coulthard retired in the lead, having spun off on the parade lap before the race was restarted, which enabled him to get back into contention. That Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill collided. Gerhard Berger, who had led the race, retired. Jean Lacey, who led the race, retired. And Tony Jardine has been trying, I think unsuccessfully, to talk to Damon Hill. Tony, any comments?
Well, there is a big scrum down here between the 2 Williams trucks. We did get a few words out of him, Murray, but basically he doesn't want to talk because he's on his way to see the stewards. He did ask me what Michael Schumacher had said, and I said that Schumacher and the Benetton team have already said they're going to protest Hill. He wants to look at the video first. He has promised to come back and talk to us later.
Well, we had contention between Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher in Australia last year, when Michael Schumacher won the championship as a result of their controversial collision. Then it was repeated at Silverstone when they collided. It's been repeated here again. Who knows what the conclusion is going to be? Michael Schumacher, of course, was racing here under a 1-race suspended ban. Damon Hill had had a 1-race suspension suspended earlier in the season, but now Johnny Herbert is on his 52nd lap. He's completed 51 laps. He's got this lap and the one to go between himself and the checkered flag and victory at Monza, with Mika Hakkinen, and there he is, second, 18 seconds behind Herbert, with Frentzen 10 seconds behind Mika Hakkinen, and it's a Benetton leading, a McLaren second, a Sauber in third position, another McLaren in 4th place. An excellent drive for Mark Blundell. We're riding with Johnny Herbert now.
Well, I should think Damon Hill wants to study the video, not to see what Michael Schumacher did, but to look at the driving of Taki Inui there in the Arrows footwork, because it was that car that both Schumacher and Hill were lapping. Having said that, it's difficult to see how Inui could have really caused that. Inui was on the right-hand side coming into the chicane. He then moved across to the left, clearing the way for Damon Hill. And I think if anything did happen, it would have been that Damon Hill might have been temporarily unsighted by the fact that he had Inui in front of him and didn't realise just how close to the braking area he was.
Johnny Herbert there is rumoured to be talking to Sauber about next year. He's rumoured to be talking to Jordan about next year. And his problem this year has been, as I've said, that he's never been able to show his true talent because of the car situation. But now he comes into the start and finish straight and crosses the line to start the 53rd and last lap in the lead.
And once again, the Italian Grand Prix at Monza has been quite incredible. Monza proving what a car-breaking circuit it is. We had David Coulthard make that mistake on the first race when he spun on the formation lap. We then had David Coulthard recover superbly, leading until he went out after the front hub bearing failed, maybe as a consequence of going over the curbs. Then we had another controversy with, of course, Damon Hill pushing Schumacher hard, and ultimately would certainly appear making a big driving mistake on that corner and running up the back of Michael Schumacher, putting them both into retirement. Gerhard Berger was then on a charge following Jean Lacey, who was leading with a Ferrari 1-2, until Berger had a suspension failure again. One wonders if it had a link with the curbs and the chicanes of Monza. And then that left Jean Lacey out for what he'd hoped must be his first win in Italy on the Italian circuit, when he had a failure of the right rear wheel. It looked almost certain like brake failure, overheating brakes, braking again being a big stress on the cars here, which has left Johnny Herbert out in front and about to score his second win of the year, a win from which he won't get tremendous satisfaction in terms of his pace. He hasn't raced to this win here, but what he has done is looked after his car, and he's not made a mistake, and this is where it's going to pay off.
Into the Parabolica for the 53rd and last time, out of the Parabolica into the finish straight, and Johnny Herbert wins the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, his second victory of the year, and out comes the fist of victory and delight as Flavio Briatore and the Benetton mechanics congratulate each other and behind Johnny Herbert, and we wait for Mika Häkkinen to come through in second position. There he is, taking a very wide line, while he's had some criticism about precipitate driving, about impulsive driving, but he's come good here. Mika Häkkinen finished second, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen has finished third. Mark Blundell has finished in fourth position, and so we have a Benetton winning, a McLaren second, a Sauber third, and Mark Blundell in the second McLaren has vindicated all the work that McLaren and Mercedes have done. This is, of course, by a long way their best finish of the year, because their highest finish previously was that of Mika Häkkinen, a fourth place in Brazil. He's improved 2 places on that. Flavio Briatore breaking into a trot to greet Johnny Herbert home. And at last it's all come good for the man from Romford. Johnny Herbert in winning his second Grand Prix of the year. Couldn't have won 2 more prestigious races. He won at Silverstone, and now he's won here at Monza. And for anybody to have done both those things is a superb achievement. And when he gets the victory award and he sees the great names that precede his as a victor of the Italian Grand Prix, he will have every reason to feel very proud indeed. And there's a final courteous gesture as he stops to give Rubens Barrichello, who could conceivably be his teammate next year, a lift home. And that reminds me, of course, of that famous situation when Nigel Mansell at Silverstone stopped the Williams at Club Corner and gave Ayrton Senna a ride home. It's an exact replication of that. Johnny Herbert, race winner in Italy. Mika Häkkinen second. So great victory for Herbert, great second place for Mika Häkkinen, and a superb third place for Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who has been compared by many people, including myself, with Michael Schumacher as having the same sort of talent. Mark Blundell fourth, Mika Salo finishes in fifth position, and to fill the Sauber Cup of Joy to overflowing, not only have they got Heinz-Harald Frentzen home third, but their new boy Jean-Christophe Bouillon in the second Sauber takes the last World Championship point for sixth position by displacing Max Papis and winning or getting across the line before the arrows, a mere 9/10 of a second ahead. Papis in seventh place. Taki Inui brings the second arrows